gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Indian Nation Station pregame show right here on the Indian Nation Station. I'm AJ Ganger. With me as always, Brian Gillespie, as it's homecoming night as the Pirates are coming in to Alexander Stadium to take on our Piqua Indians. As we look at our remaining schedule, 2 home games and 2 road games. Tonight against West Carrollton. Next week, we go at Xenia. And then we close out our home schedule with the battered helmet on the 18th against Sydney, and then at Fairborn on the 25th. Also, don't forget all of our games are tape delayed on our Indian Nation Station, Channel 5, and our YouTube page. We're only covering home football games and any playoff games if we are able to attend. Brian, this is a pretty decent schedule. You got Xenia, that's probably your toughest game remaining. Piqua can still go 6-4 if they win out.
Yeah, I was looking at that today, and it's tricky because it looks doable, and it is certainly doable because the way we've seen this team play on occasion, and in most cases, has been a solid football season. It hasn't been terrible. It also hasn't been great.
Right.
We're somewhere in between there. But, you do have West Carrollton. Your issue here is the winnable games aren't going to provide you a lot of points.
No.
It's that those games where you're talking about at Xenia City, those will really dictate where you finish. Now, a win over Fairborn might give you some points.
Yeah.
But the Xenia Sydney games, especially probably the Sydney game, Xenia, if you can win Xenia, you're in real good shape.
Yeah.
But that Sydney game, that's one that you might want to circle on the schedule. Like, okay, we got to get that one done. But first things first, we got this week's homecoming game against West Carrollton. And we know from recent past that don't want to overlook that one to get to the next week because you never know what can happen.
No, you definitely don't. And we'll get into that game coming up, as it has not been very fun for the Indians playing West Carrollton the last few times. As we take a look at our sponsors here for the 24-25 school year, we've got Lemon Meringue Floral Boutique, Bits and Pieces, This and That's Candy on Main, Dick Lumpkins Auto Body, Edison State Community College, Robert Brothers Comfort, Dr. Lil John, Little Caesars, Buffalo Wings and Rings, Atlanta Sportswear, Craig's Corporation, Harmony Systems, and the Kathy Henney team. Thank you for supporting the Indian Nation Station and Piqua Athletics. Brian, last week the MVL had 2 games that happened on Thursday night. Tip City and Butler was the first one. Tip City with the win 25-7 there. Stebbins and West Carrollton was the other one. Stebbins won 48-20. On Friday, Xenia with the 43-7 win over Fairborn, Sydney 43, Greenville 7, and obviously Troy 21 and Piqua 7. It seems like all signs are pointing to a huge matchup at the end of the year with Xenia and Tip City.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the class of the league. That's pretty obvious from what we've seen. And Xenia and Tip for sure have that's going to be a barn burner, at least in theory. At the end of the year, and I think both those teams, as good as Tip has been, they've had some matchups that were a little closer than they would like. So I think that you're going to see a pretty darn good game when those two meet up towards the end of the year.
It seems like Tip has played like 3 straight close games in a row. I mean, even 25-7, people may look at that score and go, well, that's not very close. I'm sure that game was a lot closer than what you think.
Yeah, Butler fought him for a little while there, but Tip had had enough where they were able to put him away at the end. But Tip is a very good team, but so is Xenia. So you just know you don't know what you're going to see that week.
As we move ahead now, as these other games are pretty self-explanatory, Xenia and Sydney both putting up 43 points against Fairborn and Greenville. As we move into the Troy-Piqua game last week, it was the 140th meeting in Alexander Stadium. That was a hurricane, so to speak, out there on the field for most of that game, as Caden Thomas was only 4 of 15 passing. He had 87 yards and a touchdown. Jericho Burns ran the ball 19 times, could only muster 56 yards. Debo Kinsley with the reception for a touchdown. That was 70 yards, as you saw that in the opening of the show. Owen Schaller on defense, 12 tackles, 4 for a loss. And Isaiah Martin, 7 tackles with 2 for a loss. Really, Piqua only gave up 14 points to this Troy team if you really look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a battle. I just think Troy just had 2 really good possessions where they just grinded it out, and Pickwa had no answer, and they just ran it right down the middle. They killed that time. They took the time of possession, 29-17.
Yeah.
That's a big deficit there in time of possession. The offense was spotty. Second half really got off to a slow start. Struggled. Then they had a bit of a turnover. They had a turnover, and then they had a little bit of a drive there. Just couldn't get it across on a fourth down, and that kind of sealed the deal. 7 first downs isn't really going to cut it in a game, especially against Troy. 2 years in a row, they just haven't been able to get the ball in the end zone much, or points in general against Troy. And back to the drawing board on that for next year, but in the end, it was Troy's running game that just too much to handle.
And Pickwa only had 53 yards rushing, 87 yards through the air. Troy ran the ball for 250 yards more than Pickwa with 258, and they only had one completed pass for 8 yards the entire game. It did seem like if you're looking at that game, Troy was a heck of a lot bigger than us up front as well.
Bigger, stronger, they had a lot of misdirection that our defense struggled with, but it wasn't huge plays. It felt like it was just Nick, and then they'd cut you, and then they'd get a short handoff,
Yeah.
2 yards, 3 yards, and then it'd be 22 yards, and then they just kind of whittled away at that clock, and then when they score, you're just in the deluge of rain. You feel the pressure to try to come back and score.
Yeah.
That put a lot of pressure on the Pickwa kids. They got rattled a little bit,
Yeah.
and then the rest was history.
Yeah, and it seemed like Pickwa may have got a shot with the ball right. It was a second half began where it wasn't raining, and then all of a sudden Troy had a long drive, and the floodgates just opened again too.
They missed their window because that third quarter was the perfect time to have the ball. They couldn't do anything with it. Troy did do a lot with it.
Yeah.
And then Pickwa gets it back, and it's Noah's Ark time again.
Yeah, it is. Troy now leads the series 68, 66, and 6. 141st meeting will be next season at Troy Memorial Stadium. Moving on to week 7 as we're in the last third of our schedule already, partner, as we got Butler going to Fairborn, Stebbins at Greenville, Tip City at Sydney, Xenia and Troy, which should be a good game as Xenia goes to Troy Memorial, and then we have West Carrollton, obviously, coming here to take on Pickwa. Xenia-Troy, like I said, probably the best game of the week here in the MVL.
Yeah, Xenia on the road, that makes a difference for Troy. That'll be nice to be at home for them. I don't know that they have enough to beat Xenia, but they can hold on to the ball as we saw this past Friday.
Yeah.
Keep that other team off the field. Xenia can put up a lot of points if you let them on the field. So if Troy can control the tempo of the game and able to run it like they were against Pickwa, that will keep them in that game.
I was listening to the Xenia Fairborn game that was still going on after our game last week on my way home.
Yeah,
and there was a certain point in time where Xenia fumbled the ball deep in their own territory. Next play, Fairborn fumbles the ball and gives it right back to Xenia. Game's over because it was a running clock.
Yeah, the wet football was a mess for everybody last Friday. That's for sure.
Tip City going to Sydney. That should be a pretty easy win, I would say, for Tip City on that point. Stebbins Greenville may be a good game, and Fairborn is a little bit more improved this year than in years past too.
Yeah, Butler won't have much trouble with Fairborn, but they are capable to keep it at least reasonable distance there. Stebbins, Greenville, I think Stebbins, Greenville just doesn't have a lot.
They don't.
They don't score a lot. I mean, I think they've only scored 2 or 3 touchdowns all season.
Yeah.
So I don't think Stebbins can put up a lot of points some nights, but it doesn't take a lot. It's not going to take them a lot to beat Greenville.
No.
At least in theory. So I think that should be a good separation there.
Let's go ahead and move into our game that's here tonight, Alexander Stadium. It's homecoming as the Pirates of West Carrollton come to town as Pickwa is looking for revenge from a 1-point defeat last season, 14-13. Since 2019, Pickwa and West Carrollton have only played 3 times. We had 2 years where we didn't play, but West Carrollton has won 2 out of those 3 times. Pickwa has lost a heartbreaker last week to Troy in a hurricane, 21-7. The weather, though, this week is a different story. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be perfect football weather on Friday night for homecoming. We should see, hopefully, a better Pickwa offensive performance here tonight as well. Brian, what do we need to know?
Well, I will tell you, although the numbers don't look great, West Carrollton has beat Pickwa the last 2 times they played at West Carrollton. The back end of that is that Piqua came here and beat West Carrollton 58-0 the last time they played.
Yeah, that was
at
a
Piqua.
very, very boring game to watch. I mean, you guys were even having trouble on that
It was
one.
over in a blink. It
Yeah.
was filler time, one of those things. So as much as it's been frustrating with those losses on the road, I think Piqua knows what they have in front of them.
Yep.
I think they know that, okay, we can't mess up. We can't trip up anymore this year. I mean, we have to do our best. We have to win as many games as we can. Whether or not West Carrollton provides computer points, which they really don't, that win, every win is important. And to build that momentum as you head down the stretch against the Sydneys and the Xenias and those type of teams, this game is just as important as those as you lead up to that. And I think the kids will, at home, homecoming, exciting atmosphere, nice weather.
Yeah.
I think it's a perfect combination for a really, really ugly game for West Carrollton. I got to be honest, I don't think this one's going to be close.
What does our offense have to do to kind of get things going? Because it seems like they're on again in a game, and then they're off again in a couple games. They're on again and off again. Is it just matchups, do you think, or is it just execution?
Well, it's opponent. I mean,
Yeah.
our offense is not a juggernaut by any stretch, but we do good things. We can run the ball sometimes. We've been kind of spotty with our running game. But against teams that are lesser, like the Greenville, we did whatever we wanted.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's going to be what's going to happen at West Carrollton. They have to be sharp. They have to come out ready to play. Less penalties, fewer penalties. They had 4 penalties against Piqua, or against Troy, I mean. So that's not too bad.
Yeah.
But, you want to stay focused, be focused so that you can walk out of that game, make it a running clock, make it a stress-free environment, have a fun time on homecoming, and then come back with that stretch run of 3 games ready to close out the season on a high note and get in the playoffs. Right now, spot number 16. And as I look at the standings, there's a couple teams down below. There's a Trotwood lurking. Now, they haven't played well. They're only 1-5. But I look at their schedule, and they're probably going to win out. So that team, there's a couple teams that didn't have a great start to the season. So if Piqua doesn't pick it up, there's a chance 2 years in a row you could miss the playoffs.
Even going 5-5, there's a chance if you drop one of these next 4 games.
For sure. And you need one of those games. You need Sydney.
Yeah.
You need that win. You got to have that win to get points. Fairborn will give you a few points. They're going to win maybe 1 or 2 more against the lower competition. But you need a significant win to propel you at least to that 15 or 14 spot so that you're not stuck playing the number 1 overall seed, because you don't want any part of that, because Anderson's going to be up there, or whoever it is up there. You don't usually want to play the number 1 seed and have to go down to Cincinnati to do it.
No, you really don't, especially an Anderson team that we know is a very good one, no matter where you're playing them at.
Yes.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Indian Nation Station pregame show. Brian, do you have anything else before we get off of here?
No, it's going to be a fun weekend. In theory, homecoming is always a fun weekend. Welcome back, everybody. Good to see everybody from the past and in the future. Everybody gets together at the football game to see everybody in their dress and, get that queen on Friday night and then the king on Saturday night. Should be fun. They just got to take care of business.
Yes, they do. Well, again, thank you again for watching this edition of the pregame show. We'll be back in 2 weeks as we have the battered helmet coming with Sydney taking on Piqua. The next time we'll dive into a little more of our playoff rankings to let you know where teams are and what the chances of Piqua likely getting into the playoffs. Brian, are you calling the game tomorrow night, or will you be off again?
I will be here.
You will be here. So, all right. Don't forget, the game's coming up next here on the Indian Nation Station with Tom Michaels and the man Brian Gillespie on the call. I'm AJ Ganger saying, go Piqua, beat West Carrollton.